shift gears and talk about inclusivity and accessibility of digital content, which is we think is a core component of how sustainability in book publishing will be maintained going forward. And we're particularly looking at organizing content to serve wider markets. We're fortunate actually today to have Laura Brady as our moderator. Laura is Director of Cross Media at House of Anansi Press, based in the Toronto area. She's an active participant in a variety of different accessibility initiatives, and an organizer and a frequent speaker at Tech Forum, BookNet Canada's fantastic event that they hold each March. It just wrapped up not too long ago. And she'll be joined today, and I think be introducing Rachel Comerford, who's our director of committee chair of our workflow committee, Gillian Hetzler from Benetech, and Tzviya Siegman from Wiley. Laura?
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure why I'm not on video yet.
You are.
Oh, there we are. There we are. Grand. Good. Okay. Super duper.
You're good.
Nice to see everyone. Thank you for having me, Brian and Julie. It's nice to be invited to do this. So I am here today with my esteemed colleagues, Rachel from Macmillan, Tzviya from Wiley, and Gillian from Benetech, to talk about accessibility in publishing. So I have a few questions to form the conversation, but I honestly could just let these three fantastic women just talk. They know so much about this space. Rachel, I want to start with you. It seems to me that we're at a tipping point when it comes to thinking about accessibility in publishing. Lots of people are talking about it in a wide variety of contexts. But accessibility is one of those catch-all phrases that can mean anything from the complexity of language to the specificity of code. Do you think you could give us a little bit of a primer on what we're talking about when we're talking about accessibility in publishing?
So this is the rest of the day, right?
Yes.
I could spend all day answering this question, but even I don't want to hear myself talk that much. I think the easiest way to break down accessibility is into three areas, which is people, place, and product. Working backwards, product is this end-to-end development of a platform and content to make sure it's available for our users, right? Place is that physical location and all the associated environments. So that would be where students and teachers go to school, where employees go to work, how people access or are transported from one place to another. And I say associated environments because now more than ever, the place that people work is online, which means that it's a company's responsibility to make sure that digital locations a person needs to access are accessible, like the human resources site. We just heard from some great human resources managers, or a digital asset manager. And then finally, people, because accessibility is all about people. And that means using inclusive language in products and places and in conversation. And I think it can be easy to forget that accessibility needs are largely created by the environment. So when we create a place or a product, there's this moment of truth where consciously or unconsciously, we decide how inclusive these things are going to be. So in a digital environment, I think that moment of truth is probably a little less clear, especially for the uninitiated. So for an example, if I'm building a school, I don't put in stairs and then say students with assistive mobility devices should throw pebbles at the windows until somebody notices, and then they'll come out and give them their schoolwork. And of course, if there are enough pebbles, we'll cost out a ramp. But in a digital environment, the defining line is a little, it's a little less, forgive me, concrete. What it means is, and this is like the real answer to your question, accessibility is a part of every single thing that we do. And when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about making sure all people can access all places and all products. So it's super, super simple and super complicated. And that was me keeping my answer short.
That's hilarious. And of course, because I'm on video today, there's dump trucks out this way and somebody doing their grass that way. So I'm going to keep muting myself, and apologies to everyone. Tzviya and Gillian, do you want to weigh in on the question and a little bit about what Rachel just said?
just to emphasize, it is all pervasive and trying to make an equitable experience for everyone. And when it comes to content, especially for, say, education publishers, you're not just, say, preventing someone from reading a book, you're putting a blocker on someone's like continued education as well. So the stakes are, can be quite high.
I'll just add that Rachel talked about the moment of truth for accessibility. I think it's important to recognize that there are several moments of truth. It can be at the point of purchase. It can be at the point of wanting to read the book. It can be at the point of answering.
Sia, we're having trouble hearing you.
Sorry, is that better?
Okay. That's much better, thank you.
Oh, well then you'll have to see my face like this. There can be several moments of truth. Rachel talked about the moment of truth for accessibility. It can be at the point of purchase. It can be at the point of reading a book. It can be at the point of contacting customer service. And when you say my screen reader is not working, if the customer care representative says, what's a screen reader, that's a problem. It's just important to recognize that it's not just the actual digital interaction. It also has to do with the human interaction, because accessibility is something that really will impact every aspect of your workflow, and it's really affects the entire supply chain, even in areas that you might not have considered. Everybody needs some amount of accessibility training.
So exactly right. I've been doing a lot of work training the people, my colleagues at House of Anansi Press, and getting them thinking about accessibility, and it's now sort of pervaded almost everybody's workflow and how they think about how they're acquiring authors and contracts and editing. Like, it really does become a 360 thing. Once you start folding it into how you think, it becomes omnipresent.
For me, the best moment is when people start asking you the question, like, how does accessibility impact this? Should we be doing X, Y, and Z? And that's like the sun has risen and is shining on the land.
I had a moment last week where somebody who was writing alt text for really complex children's picture books really eclipsed me in how she was approaching this issue. And then I asked her questions, and I just felt so happy and grateful that people were putting the time and energy into that. Tzviya, in the conversation last week, you had something really interesting to say about the technology that drives a lot of digital publishing. I'm wondering if you can address the question of technical debt in conversations about accessibility. How can publishers and developers use technology, for example, to ensure the sustainability of their content?
Sure, this is something I feel really strongly about. One of the things that we talk about when doing developer training is the best way to write code in an accessible way. And often the best way is to simplify things. Often in accessibility training, we talk about using HTML as opposed to the newest or the oldest JavaScript library, because there's a lot of built-in accessibility in HTML. So for example, if I use, and I'll go into code for just a minute here, if I use the HTML button tag, that conveys a lot of information to assistive technology. If I create a button using React.js or Materials UI or whatever it is that I'm using, I have to write that accessibility information myself using ARIA or whatever it is that I choose to use. That also creates sustainability, because HTML is written in such a way that browsers are supposed to be supporting that forever and ever and ever. Even if I use something from HTML3 that is obsolete, it was never deprecated. That's not always true with JavaScript. And oftentimes developers come to the table saying, I know how to use this and that from JavaScript, but it doesn't necessarily hold up. It also, like Laura was saying, creates a certain amount of technical debt, which is kind of a trending phrase right now, because it often creates a requirement to create layers and layers of accessibility that might not need to be there if you're using kind of simplified code using just HTML. Now, of course, there's place for JavaScript. JavaScript creates a lot of exciting stuff that we can't necessarily do with HTML, but it's important to think about what you can do using things that are natively accessible, automatically accessible. And then when you're running your accessibility audits, think about what you can do that will also probably improve your runtime, because JavaScript makes things a little slower too.
Yeah, too true. Simple is elegant, and simple is almost always best, especially when it comes to accessibility. Rachel or Gillian, do you want to jump in on this question? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things that we talk about, and it's another industry buzzword, is to be able to future-proof our products. And it's this idea that we'll be able to use this ebook on any platform, no matter how the platform develops over time. And what Tzviya is so adeptly saying that I'm about to mingle is that we need to stick with tried and true methods, things that we know can consistently support all of our users. And we also need to support the development of tried and true methods. We need to work as a team overall in publishing to make sure that the goals that we have, like cross-referencing or footnotes or pop-up definitions or drag and drop activities, have some sort of accessible standard so that we're creating a sustainable environment for those interactives.
Gillian, do you want to pop in on that question, or shall we go to the next topic?
We can.
Pardon?
We can move on.
Okay, got it. So, Gillian, I wanted to, I have like a fairly big question for you that I hope Rachel and Tzviya will weigh in on as well. There's a myth that publishers don't have time to fold accessibility into their workflows, that it's too much of a drain on resources and is too expensive. I wonder if you can address the question of the business case for working with accessibility as a primary concern.
Yeah, definitely. So first, I want to acknowledge that change is hard. And if there isn't something that you're doing today, it can take time and resources. So I want to acknowledge that and put that out there first. But why accessibility? So there's three things that come to mind. So first, kind of as both Tzviya and Rachel said earlier, adding accessibility to your ebook production pipeline actually enhances your book for all readers. So it's not just about, oh, can this be a specialized format for one person, but the rising tide raises all boats, so to speak. So things, whether it's a simpler design, or we talked about different situational disabilities. I don't know how many people here take advantage of, closed captions, for example. Like, that's technically an accessibility feature, but many people use that on a daily basis. So also there's a history of having to create specialized formats for individuals with accessibility needs, different readers. And so one of the nice things about, say, EPUB 3, for example, is that all these accessibility features are included in that file format. And so you can get to a future where there's just one file for all readers rather than different formats for different types of readers. And that's pretty powerful from a sustainability point of view. The second piece is actually market share. So if accessibility is not part of your product today, there is a % of the population that you're not reaching, a % of the market that you're not reaching. I like to say that in terms of kind of like, how big is this market? There are more people who are blind than there are who are redheads, which worldwide is about, say, like 300 million people. And then from a learning disability perspective, so those are, say, individuals who have challenges, say, processing the written words on the page, whether that be something like dyslexia, for example. And so there are, like more people with learning disabilities than there are those who are left-handed. And that's like anywhere from like 350 to 700 million people worldwide. So if there are, like, this is a pretty significant population, and it may be that some of these people are accessing your books but they're not having a great experience, or maybe they won't come back. So something to keep in mind. And then the third piece is from a sustainability and like cost standpoint, is that if as a publisher, you can integrate accessibility into your production pipeline so that every book that comes out has these accessibility features written in, and it's happening kind of at the birth of your book, then that's something that you kind of pay the cost today, essentially upfront, get everyone on board, update your production pipeline processes and internal best practices, and then you're rolling going forward. There is definitely still a cost of a pain of remediating backlist, but then that's something that you can spread out on your own terms based on, say, best-selling titles or whatever that may be. And actually in our conversation last week, I think it's Tzviya was saying, this is exactly like ebooks. So 10 or so years ago, we had this new format come out, and everyone's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And guess what? Ebooks are generally part of most people's default production pipeline today.
On the question of remediating the backlist, I work in Canada, and we have funding from the Department of Canadian Heritage. I was able to hire 2 bodies to help me remediate the backlist and to work on remediating our own website. I feel very fortunate for that. So our backlist is in fairly good shape, and we're working on more public-facing pieces of that. But the front list is clean as a whistle and ready to go, partly because of Benetech's Global Certified Accessible program. We've really straightened out all the kinks in our pipeline. I wonder if you want to just say a few things about that program, since Rachel and Tzviya are both engaged in that process, and so was I, and found a lot of value there. Maybe publishers here don't know about it, so please tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the Global Certified Accessible program is essentially a third-party certification validation process where the Benetech team will take a look at individual files being produced out of a given XML EPUB workflow, and then give detailed and direct feedback on those files and whether or not they meet WCAG AA standards, accessibility standards. The nice thing about this program is that one of the questions that kind of constantly come up is like, great, accessibility is important. I want to do it, but how? And so this way, you have kind of essentially on standby a team of folks who are experts in this area and can ask those nitty-gritty questions about, whether it's, your JavaScript or how you're coding something very specifically, and then do that iterative feedback. So once you have, say, 3 files that actually pass out of this program, then you as a company get this gold certified accessible stamp that you can put on all of your websites, in your books, on sales pages, etc., and have that validation where it's not just say, yourself as an individual or a publisher saying, yes, we follow accessibility guidelines, but you have that validated from an outside source too. And the nice thing is, it's teaching a person how to fish, so to speak.
I'll just add to that. I noticed somebody asked for some steps on how to get started. I would say before you start with Benetech, make sure that all of your files pass EPUB check and also ACE by DAISY, because those are the first steps in getting certification. There are also a number of us who live a pretty digital life. And if you have questions, you can certainly reach out to any of us online. Well, there are no slides here, but we're all pretty findable online. You can post our hashtags. There's a group on Twitter, #eProduction, with no vowels except the E. And generally asking questions on that group will get you a lot of helpful answers. There's also an EPUB check Twitter account. And if you ask a question of the EPUB check people, myself included, you'll pretty much get an answer within 24 to 48 hours. And there's also the EPUB check GitHub repository. And if you have questions directly related to how EPUB check works, if you have issues about EPUB check, that's the place to ask. If you have questions about using EPUB check, that's not the place to ask. But Twitter is a great place, or you can contact me directly.
And to add to Tzviya's kind of validation tool, DAISY, which is a international accessibility standards organization, they have created this wonderful free tool called ACE by DAISY, which is a fantastic free accessibility checker. I call it like very baseline. It won't necessarily say, if you pass ACE, that doesn't mean that you're meeting all of WCAG AA accessibility standards, but it's a really great way to say kind of like, okay, well, where are we today and where can we start? So definitely EPUB check first, ACE second. And I also put a link in the chat to Benetech's Born Accessible website as well for more information about the Global Certified Accessible program.
I would also put out standardization. I think that can be pretty key in order to meeting these requirements. And I think a lot of people shy away from that to start because they're afraid that everything's going to look and feel exactly the same when they put out books. But the more areas of your product that you can standardize, whether it's creating a CSS that functions similarly across all of your titles, or standardizing the way that you're adding metadata tags and stuff like that's going to make it a lot easier for you to implement these changes without having to touch every single book.
Thank you all. This has been really great. It's nice to chat with you all and to hear about the great things that you're doing and to get your perspective on this. Brian, are you ready to take us back over?
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say first, thank you, Laura, for preparing and moderating this panel. It's been really helpful and instructive. And of course, thanks to Rachel, Tzviya, and Gillian, who are kind of leading the charge in the US market for a lot of the work that's been done to improve accessibility. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to have a brief break, about 5 minutes, to come back at 11:45. We're going to play a little bit. If you're not inclined to leave your computer, we're going to be playing a kind of an overview of our committee work over the past year. But if